The COVID-19 pandemic is developing rapidly. Whether or not the virus was produced in a bioweapon laboratory is not as important a question as to what can be done to stop this deadly infection. Whether or not it was leaked out from a lab by accident or on purpose is also not as important as knowing what exactly we are dealing with. This video asks the China scientist who was expelled from Canada to hold a press conference so she can tell the world community her side of the story. Mistakes can happen and now is not the time for blame, but we need to know so that research can be focused correctly. The potential of this COVID-19 pandemic boils down to a simple question: what is more dangerous and deadly, a disease that kills 1,000 people, or one that kills 1,000,000 people? It is a mistake to think that because the lethal rate of COVID-19 is presumed, at this point of time, mid-February 2020, to be less than SARS, it is a less deadly epidemic. It is the infection rate that is more important than the percentage of lethality. The high lethal rate of SARS is what made it a naturally self-limiting disease. It came and went very quickly without a vaccine even being required. The very high infectious rate of COVID, together with that high lethal rate, is what make this by far a more serious pandemic. At this time there is a pyramid of infected people and we can only be sure many more people are infected than is officially known. We simply do not yet know its true lethality, because the true numbers of both death and total size of the pyramid is not accurately known. All we know for sure is that it is more than what has been reported. So at this time, it is important to gather as much facts about this new virus as possible. Which is why the question of whether or not it was chance mutation that created it, or whether it was created in a biowarfare laboratory is important. Every country has the right to defend itself, and that it is well known that the US Army has been developing biological weapons for decades. No reasonable person should hold it against China for developing weapons that its adversaries also have. It is only natural for China, which has been actively developing its army, to also want to be strong in the sphere of biowarfare. In fact, videos had been produced by the CCP government to publish their advances in the field of SARS virus research. Just recently in December 2019, a person claiming to be a Chinese spy said on Australian TV about how China has successfully spied on many sectors of Australian science and research facilities. It seems China has been copying and obtaining technology through spying and other means. It has been very successful at making copies of high-tech products. What is most concerning at this time is that just recently, in July 2019, a prominent Chinese biotech scientist, together with her husband, and some of their Chinese students, were dismissed from Canada's top biowarfare Type 4 lab. But before proceeding, a word about how quality control and organizational structure is vital for the safe operation of a Type 4 biological laboratory. In many ways, these Type 4 virology laboratories are as dangerous as a nuclear power plant, like the Chernobyl accident. It is quite possible for accidental leakage of viral matter from such a lab. It was alleged by Canada that the Chinese researcher in question shipped samples of dangerous viruses, such as Ebola, from Canada to China, illegally. Because of these allegations against her, and because the COVID-19 virus is so similar to the SARS virus, and because there is a Type 4 biolab in Wuhan, it is a shame major news agencies of the world are not pursuing this story deeper. She has presumably returned to work in China, and may well have been working in the Wuhan Virology Laboratory. Where is she? It is understandable that any major news agency would not want to report this, as they might be blacklisted by the Chinese CCP government and banned from China for years. Hence it is not surprising that all of the MSM are silent on this topic. Governments and even the WHO are fearful of China. But then it is surprising that the China CCP government itself is not presenting the Chinese researcher, who was sacked from the Canadian laboratory, for a news conference in China, so she herself can assure us that she or her husband were not in fact working in the Wuhan Virology Institute, and give us their side of the story. In the early phase of the outbreak, we read in MSM reports that the prestigious medical journal The Lancet had published a peer-reviewed study which pointed to the Wuhan wildlife market as being the source of the virus. But a closer examination of this very study reveals some revealing facts. Firstly, all the 35 scientists responsible for this study were Chinese scientists. Secondly, the study was funded by the Chinese government. And thirdly, the study itself showed that the virus appears unusual to contain portions of SARS, MERS and white lab mice genes. So there is reason to believe this is a virus that may have been created by splicing together segments of genetic matter in a bioweapon laboratory. Hence the Chinese government itself has from very early on blaming their own Wuhan wildlife market as the source of the infection, and yet they imposed only a temporary ban on wildlife markets. This is strange because in the case of SARS, which also began in China, the blame was also placed on wildlife markets. It would seem quite obvious that a strong and powerful authoritarian government would be able and would want to very much to firmly shut down permanently the sources of two of their worst epidemics. It can be seen the economic and social damage that China has had to bear has been tremendous. We should also bear in mind that there are wildlife markets throughout Asia and ask, why did SARS and SARS-2 both start in China? Is it possible both SARS and SARS-2 are bioweapons? The difference being that SARS was too lethal and hence it was self-limiting and therefore did not make the desired grade to be a bioweapon of choice. Hence a reasonable person has cause to wonder if the Chinese government knew all along that it had accidentally leaked the COVID-19 virus from its Wuhan Virology laboratory and was all out to shift the world's attention away from the laboratory, and shift attention away from the recent expulsion of a Chinese virology scientist from a similar lab in Canada. Some say this is a bioweapon made by the US and planted in China. This is unlikely because apart from it being a brazen act of warfare, this would quickly fall back on the US themselves. Indeed, if China believed this to be true, wished they now have access to unlimited quantities of viruses to infect the US, either directly or indirectly via neighboring countries.